Chapter 4.4, Part 3. So the next one we're going to look at is Willard Wiggins' Statue of Liberty. And make no mistake, this is an actual eye of a needle. And there's like a little platform he's kind of glued in there. And this is usually a grain of rice or a piece of sand that he uses, and he carves into it. And he makes little miniatures in there. If you ever get the chance to go to the Museum of Jurassic Technology, it isn't what it sounds like. It's a kind of a kooky, offbeat sort of a museum. It's in West Los Angeles, near Culver City, and some of his work is there. It has all kinds of crazy things in there, and you have to look through a magnifying lens in order to see this piece. So some artists work in these really remarkably strange ways, and this is one of those people. So in his case, when he grew up and he had dyslexia, which I also suffer from, so I understand his point in this piece, that he was made to feel small, and so he decided to make work as small as possible to show how great or how interesting small can be, if that makes sense. Now, he has to work on these between heartbeats, and I know that's really hard to imagine getting yourself to that point, but you can think of like a marathon runner or an astronaut going into space probably has that much thought or control over their blood flow or their breathing and all that. It's hard to say, but he had to get himself into a really calm state and able to do this and just calm himself down so he doesn't, have too much pressure. He's making the right mark, and he uses one eyelash as a paintbrush, and that's just so remarkable. So that's his particular piece, and he is basically using his body in a way that, if you think about scientifically, he's using his body in a way carefully enough to work on this piece. And he's making this, how it sort of ties in scientifically as well, is that he is making this while looking under a microscope. Now, you don't need a microscope to look at this piece, but you do need magnification. You can see the size of this needle. We wouldn't be able to see this with the naked eye. So it's quite enlarged here. These pieces are really, I don't know, I think they're very eerie. But this is Heather Dewey Hagborg, Stranger Visions. And these are 8 by 6 by 6, just kind of faces constructed out of different material. I think it's 3D, like plastic printing. I don't know if they're painted. It's not really giving us that much about these. But what she's doing is she's going around and she's picking up genetic materials from spit out chewed gum and swabs and hair and things like that. Kind of gross, I know, but she's taking that DNA and she's investigating that. She's running some tests and she's seeing what perhaps eye color and skin color and facial features that person might have from their DNA, and then she's constructing these. And wouldn't that be wild if you were in the area and she based that on some gum that you had, spat on the ground somewhere nearby, and it really did end up looking like you. It's kind of a wild idea. So there's a lot of artwork these days that's really embracing technology, and I think I was beginning to talk about that a little bit, but it's expanded our ability to do things in different ways. Like the 3D printing is one aspect of things. A lot of things that are on, we looked at an artist that was in the previous chapter that was on YouTube and blew up, that love letter to her future grandchild. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which technology has expanded art, but it's also a conceptual leap for some of us to think about how this work was made. It's not so much about accurate portraiture as much as it's about and sculpting by hand, because that's not how this was made. There was a digital file, and it was printed out by a 3D printer. You can kind of see these on these ridges of the nose and this edge here. 3D printing, if you've not seen it, it's kind of like the little, it's like a spitting out plastic, and it's just kind of going back and forth. So I'm going to assume, because of the way these lines go, it's going back and forth this way, and it's making this sculpture with the plastic. And I want to say she paints it. Okay, so yeah, based on her findings. So it's also addressing the issues of privacy about DNA profiling. I just watched some, oh gosh, crazy thing, one of those things about serial killers, and they couldn't get DNA for this guy. So the police, in one of those rare times where they sort of followed somebody around for 24 hours a day, they just waited for him to throw away a coffee cup on the street, and they picked it up and they got his DNA that way. So there are some questions about the legality or the privacy that we have, because our DNA is left out there in the world, trash cans or things we've touched, things we've eaten. So that is also something she's exploring there. Another piece that has to do with bio art, because we are kind of touching on bio art here, not really hardcore, but this one is in chapter 1.5 under the heading of time. So these are plants that are put into environments here, and it's sort of an experiment to see what would survive on a space mission, if that makes sense. And she's cut out the more expensive light sources, meaning these are lower emissions. These are LED lights in the I think it's blue and red and blue LED lights down here, it says. So it's not giving the full spectrum of light. So casting on that makes the plants look kind of that color as well. But it's trying to minimize the use of water, like creating like a little terrarium kind of a thing, if you will, and recycling the water so that plants perhaps could be grown in space. So that's something about astroculture, meaning, astronauts would bring these little plants. There's a lot of sci-fi that we've watched about that, but in reality, not too much of this has moved forward, but this was sort of a place, again, where art meets science. So moving on to away from actual technology in the work, well, I don't know, this is kind of fuzzy in this next one, but we're going to get into perception, senses, and psychology. We're going to get into the pointillists, and this includes the impressionists as well. But artists are using scientific studies to help them understand visual perception. And you will see this back in chapter 1.4 with color theory. So it's this kind of good place to really look at this and then go back into color theory in 1.4 when you get there. So artists experiment with ways to use their art to trigger responses from other senses and personal experience or subconscious. Now that gets into the psychological down at the bottom here. First one is Sunday on Le Grand Jatte, 1884 to 86. Seurat, right down here. This fellow, Georges Seurat, French. He was a type of impressionist. Some people will say it that way, or some people will say he's a post-impressionist, or some people will say he's his own category, which is pointillism. Okay, so he uses points. Like, instead of brush strokes that are swoop, 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 he's just making little tiny, tiny dots. I've seen many, many art students attempt a small painting, like a 12-inch by 12-inch. This is almost 7 feet high, 6'9" by 10 foot wide. This is a massive painting, and just think about dots and dots and dots and dots. So it took him 2 years to do this painting, and just continually layer and layer and layer of dots. The idea here is that optical color mixing is at play. So what's happening is, if he puts, for instance, I guess we can go up here, a yellow dot by a blue dot and a dark green dot, you're going to mix those together and make sort of a different green, if that makes sense. You can kind of see it in here too, like where the ocean's coming through just a little bit, or sorry, this little man-made lake coming through the trees. But what he's trying to do is to get you to mix the color in your own brain. So one of the reasons we love Impressionism, and we love pointillism so much, is because you're doing part of the work in this artwork, right? If you kind of move your eyes around this, you just kind of see all these dots if you were up close to it. But if you're standing away from it, which is kind of what we're doing since this is shrunken, if you understand what I'm saying, that you're mixing these colors in your own brain. That engagement, that back and forth of our brain and the work really pulls us in and gives us a more intimate feeling um, with it. He's also using after image effect, which is that your eyes kind of tire from looking at a color. Like you'll stop, and we're going to look at this in Jasper John's piece, but we're gonna start to blend these colors, and we'll see the complementary. And I'll explain that more in a moment. But pointillism, lots of little dots, and he's making up colors by putting, he's making up orange by putting red and yellow together, and then that mixes in your head and makes orange. You can kind of see more of it like on the lighter areas here, like on his pants. Those are not white pants. There's blue for the shadows and there's yellow for the sunlight. Now he also paints this frame, which I think is a little strange, but he does that so it doesn't take your eye away from the pointillism or the dots. Very precise. So color. So the part of the thing that's happening here in the late 19th century is color theories coming into play. So certain painters like the Impressionists and again pointillism through Seurat. There's one other pointillist, I'm forgetting the name, but using the color theory with the optical mixture and after image effect. Those are important. So this is going to be fun. I'm not going to do this here because it asks you to look for a whole minute, but you can do this in the regular PowerPoint or in the book. The white dot here, if you focus your eyes there for a full minute, and then you come down and you focus your eyes on the black dot here, you're going to see a flag, red, white, and blue, because orange is the complementary, meaning the opposite of blue, and green is the complementary of red. So when you go down here, you're going to see a red and white stripes. You're going to see the opposite with the black down here. Red and white stripes, and you're going to see a blue color field here with white stars. So that's how after imaging works, and that's how you're basically, your eyes get sort of fatigued. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting if it's your rods or your cones, but your eyes get fatigued and then they stop seeing that color, if that sort of makes sense. And so the complementary appears in your brain and then you put it down here by yourself. So this is intended for you to do this. So go ahead and do that on the regular PowerPoint. And the best way to think of complementaries is Lakers, Broncos, and Christmas. So green and red. So this is going to give you the red. Orange is going to give you blue, so that's our Broncos, and then Lakers would be kind of that yellow purple, give or take. Sometimes it's a little bit more toward orange, it's not an exact thing. You'll have to play around with that a little bit, okay? All right, another one we're going to look at, cello music. This is a photograph, Marcia Smilak. Now, this is to do with synesthesia. Synesthesia. It's a hard word to say. I've known a couple people with this, and it's really interesting, the artwork that they've made. A couple artists that make work in this way. Personally, I've known them, and it kind of blew my mind the first time I heard about this. But what happens is sounds create images in the brain or colors in the brain, and even like everything is kind of mixed up. I guess that's the best way I could say it. So it's creating a sound in the brain when you're looking at a color, or the sound is creating a color. It kind of works like that. Things are all kind of mixed up. So I'm going to read from the book here on this part. The process whereby stimulation in one sense causes experience in a different sense, such as visualizing color when we hear music, is called synesthesia. The American artist Marcia Smilak experienced life as a synesthete and creates artworks that reflect this correspondence between the senses. So when I walked by the water and heard a cello, I couldn't resist the sound, so I gave in and aimed my camera at what had elicited this. As soon as I let go of my thoughts, the texture of the water washed over me in sync with the sound and turned to satin on my skin. So she's really just feeling this sensually, if that makes sense. So the senses are kind of, your touch, taste, smell, and so on. They're all kind of mixed together, or they're stimulating a different sense. Okay, very rare kind of a set of circumstances, but very interesting. Salvador Dali, we've probably all seen this by now. This is one of those pieces of artwork that has become part of popular culture, so it's very likely you have actually seen this. It is the size of a piece of paper, slightly larger, 9.5 by 13 inches. It's always shocking because it's such a huge painting to us emotionally and culturally that we think of it as a giant piece of artwork, like the Sunday Grand Jeté, sorry, that large pointillism piece by Seurat, but it's not. It's very, very small. Then I think also there were posters made of this that were quite large, so that's quite deceptive. Okay, so Dali is one of our surrealists. He's one of the most important surrealists, along with Magritte and a few others. And he is taking both the psychological concepts of surrealism from Dr. Freud, Sigmund Freud, early 20th century. This is from 1931. Freud, I believe, is still living at this time. And he's also dealing with Einstein's theories of time. So the surrealists embrace both of those, and even the cubists kind of get into some of the Einstein's theories and a little bit of Freudianism as well, with Picasso even earlier than this. But the proper surrealism is in this time frame, sort of between the wars, World War I and World War II. So this is a self-portrait, kind of. He's got his tongue hanging out, very large, closed eye, sort of flattened blob of a face. And it talks a little bit about how he had a sort of a melted blob of cheese, and that's sort of where we get that imagery from of the two clocks and the self-portrait here of the face. Ants have a specific meaning to him. He has in Freudianism as well. And then we've had this coastline that is like the Catalan coast. He's from Catalonia, Spain. The shoreline looks very much like those cliffs. So it's a dreamscape. It's not a real place. It's meant to be um, a study of a dream that he might have had. And he probably pushed some of the symbolism a little bit further. But this is what we're looking at from sexual urges, behavior, and let's see what Dali says. He said the painting was nothing more than the soft, extravagant, solitary, paranoid, critical camembert cheese of space and time. He can be very sarcastic and flippant. It's hard to know what really he meant by this piece, but he painted. Oh, also it says he painted a fly on the drooping watch on the ledge, a visual metaphor for the phrase "time flies." That's our little fly right there. So he's a strange individual. You can watch a lot of YouTube on him or different videos on him. Really interesting character. Didn't really want to tell us much about his artwork. A lot of strange sexual behavior and so on. Inspired by Sigmund Freud. What else do we want to say? Distorted sense of time and space. And I think we kind of understand this, and also a possible symbol of impotence. So he has a lot of artwork to do with impotence and solitary behavior and frustrations with women, and that you'll see more of those at another point in time.